What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And this one I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening with the economic calendar moving forward, break down why tomorrow is going to be very big for the markets as we have CPI data coming out, not to mention new developments on the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on invested cash. The offer ends very soon, in just about 2 weeks from now. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the charts. So just know that SPY is on a bit of a downtrend right now, making lower highs and lower lows. What happened today was we saw this test very close to the 599 area, close to what we were predicting in the morning, before we got this big rejection all the way down to 594, about a 5-point drop almost. And then what happened was buyers tried to defend SPY back up, only to see it get a rejection again and still close in the red. So overall, the bears had a bigger edge today. And the question remains, what's going to happen for tomorrow? And the answer is, it's going to depend on CPI. That's why I want to break down some data first before I talk about Palantir, Tesla, and all these other stocks. Just know this, the market was a little bit different from yesterday. Instead, now we're seeing tech lead the way up. So we saw Nvidia, Microsoft, and a couple of big tech stocks hold the market up. But other tickers out there, if you look at the finance sector, were very, very weak. If you look at health, technology, if you look at like retail, not to mention utilities, we saw the market slow down on those ends. So it's kind of like the opposite of what we saw yesterday, a very mixed market. Today, we saw more red than green, which dragged us lower. Now, for tomorrow, we have some very important data coming out, which is why it's going to be a very important day. Tomorrow is going to be Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. 1 hour before the market opens at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the CPI data report coming out. This is going to be very important. After CPI comes out, by the way, we also have a bunch of Fed speakers like Logan. Then we have more like Schmidt, and the list goes on with a bunch of these Fed speakers. That's what's happening for tomorrow. CPI, then a bunch of Fed speakers. Now, for CPI, for core CPI month over month, that's all items without food and energy month over month, we're expecting 0.3%, the same as what we got from before. And then for year over year, we're expecting 3.3%, the same as what we got before as well. So we'll be watching to see how that ends up looking. For CPI month over month, we're also expecting, and that's for all items CPI, we're expecting 0.2%, the same as before. So we're expecting a flat CPI. However, the only thing we are expecting a bit of a shift for is going to be for CPI year over year for all items. We're expecting a 2.6% report, which is slightly above what we saw before. So that's a slight increase in basically all items CPI year over year. Now, if the data comes out and everything is very close to expectations and decent, the market could still hold up. If CPI is not that good, if everything's like okay, but one or two of them are a little bit hot, that could cause the market to sell off a bit. So just be very mindful of that. CPI is known for causing big moves. Now, know this, when it comes to our data, in terms of CPI, it does tend to have a very, very strong correlation with crude futures. They do tend to like push together, come down together, push together, come down, push, come down. And as of recent, we did see crude futures go up just slightly for the month of October. It was a very, very slight increase. That means that CPI may have gone up just a little bit, but for the most part, it should be very minor. And I think that CPI should be very close to what we saw from before. Now, another factor that's going to be heavily dictated by CPI is going to be the Fed's target rate probabilities. The market thinks there's a 41% chance the Fed keeps rates the same, and there's about a 58% chance we get a 25 basis point cut in December during the FOMC meeting. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen, so we'll see what happens with CPI. Will it cause a pump or dump? We'll see what that causes, and that's going to be affecting that as well. In terms of our earnings, we had Shopify and the Home Depot announced their earnings, and SoundHound as well. Shopify did really, really well. They had the 9th consecutive quarter of revenue beats, not bad whatsoever. We saw essentially an EPS of about 64 cents, which was above estimations, and their net income was at $344 million, which is above expectations as well. Also, the gross margins were a slight improvement, or that's actually not too bad, as gross profit went up, so not bad whatsoever. Good guidance as well as they raised it. That's why the share price of Shopify went up after earnings came out. However, for SoundHound, this wasn't as great because despite the fact that revenue is at about $25.1 million, up 89% year over year, unfortunately, what's not so good is the fact that their gross margins were not that great at about 49%. And then their earnings per share was a loss of about 6 cents versus a loss of 4 cents, which was expected. So the net loss was a little bit worse than expected. That's why the share price went down. Didn't really impress investors. Guidance was pretty good, but it wasn't really enough, and that's why the share price remains a little bit low. So that being said, that's it for the data that's coming out for tomorrow. It's going to be a very, very brief summary. The question is, what's going to happen from this point on? Honestly, guys, the share price does look a little bit more bearish for SPYs for making lower highs and lower lows, but we could get a bounce or a dump depending on CPI. I will try my best to be very unbiased when I give you guys my analysis of what's going to pan out, so just keep that in mind. If we're bullish tomorrow after CPI comes out, okay, let's just say we get a big bounce. You want to see SPY get back above 598. If we reclaim that, the high of the day from today is going to be retested where this wick is in the 599 area, and potentially 600 is coming all over again for a nice bounce if we get a good CPI. If everything is below expectations or close to expectations. If some metrics are close to expectations and others are a little bit hot, that's going to be a mixed CPI. That could cause this to kind of push a bit and start dipping. And by hot, we basically mean that not 0.1, but 0.2% up or above of what we're expecting. So for example, if inflation year over year is at 2.7, 2.8%, or if inflation month over month is at 0.4%, that's like 0.2% above this, that would be a little bit more bearish. That's what I mean by a little bit hot. So if it's a little bit harder than expected for just any one or two of those metrics, then that's going to cause some downside, and that's going to increase the odds of us coming back down. If SPY does not hold 595.75, we're looking for the low to be retested alongside the 20 EMA around 594. And if that fails us, we dump all the way down to about 592.8, followed by even lower levels like 590.8. So watch those supports very carefully. 594, 592, and then basically just under 590. And then if that fails us, we have the gap to fall all the way down around 588. So in my opinion, it could go either way. Technically speaking, we do look a little bit more bearish. This does technically favor that we might be coming back down to about 594 before it tries to bounce again. So that's the most likely case for SPY depending on CPI. But honestly, I'm not really a fortune teller. I don't have some kind of like magic portal to see the future. So I don't know what's going to happen, right? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so I can't make any promises. Just know the share price of SPY is a little bit more bearish. I presume it's going to kind of pop a bit, then maybe start dipping again as the most likely case, since we are due for a little bit more of a pullback. I still say that because when you look at the daily time frame, this could be dipping a little bit lower. We still have this gap to fill down here, and also because of the fact that we have this first like red day right here. So this could be like a more significant pullback before we see a bigger bounce again. That's why I think that that's the most likely case. So tomorrow, look for a little bit of a pop tomorrow morning, depending on CPI. But then I think as time goes on, we're going to slowly make our way back down to 594 as the most likely possibility. We'll see depending on the data, but that's what I think is very probable. For ES, we're looking for a test of 6,004. That's going to be our 20 EMA. If we lose this, we're looking for a dump all the way down towards 59.80. And if we hold this, we're looking for a bounce back up to 60,020. So it could go either way. If you're bullish, you want to get back above 60.20. Otherwise, it's going to be dumping lower. This looks a little bit more bearish as we have a head and shoulders like structure, and this looks more distributive, so that does tend to favor downside and move back down to about 59.80 as the most likely possibility. So I favor downside a little bit more. We'll see what ends up happening, but that's what I think is most likely the case. Just keep that in mind. As far as Nvidia goes, it looks a little bit more bullish, technically speaking. Just know that we do have a tendency of rejecting between 148 and 150. This looks like it might try to push closer to 150 before we see a big reaction, so I find that to be the most likely possibility. Look for an attempt to get back up to 150, and we'll see if we get a rejection or not. But the upside is still there for the potential. For Bitcoin, we're just consolidating between 90 and about 86. I think it's going to continue to trade sideways in this range. Look for a dip back down to 86,000 before it tries to pop back up. But I think it's going to dip a little bit before anything else. And by the way, about Nvidia, it looks like it's going to try to retest 150, maybe go a little bit above that to 152 before it comes back down. But I think we're just range bound. Just wanted to clarify that. Tesla is looking a little bit weaker right here on the 4-hour time frame. If we're bullish on Tesla, you want to get back above 330. If that breaks, we're looking for 336 and 340 is our targets. If we continue to fall, we're looking for the main support around that 320 then 316 area at the 20 EMA. And if that fails us, we come all the way back down closer to about 305, and then this imbalance takes us down to about 297. I think that technically speaking, Tesla looks like it's going to be dipping back down to about 316 to 320, a little bit lower before we see some kind of bounce. It does have like a falling wedge-like structure, as you guys can see right over here, but we'll see how things end up going. I think the odds favor a little bit more downside for Tesla before it tries to get a bounce. That's the most likely case that I'm essentially looking at. So watch levels that call down. Just know that downside looks a little bit more prominent. For NQ is looking a little bit weaker here. We have kind of like a head and shoulders like structure. If we end up losing 21,132, we're looking for a dip back down for 21,000 flat. If we break past 21,200, we're looking for a push back up for 21,250. This is favoring a move down. Looking at the head and shoulders that's forming, at least technically speaking, it does favor that a little bit more. Once again, I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know what's going to happen with CPI, so I can't make any promises. But this chart is suggesting we're going to be dipping below 21,100 most likely. I think this is going to favor downside a little bit more as the most likely possibility. For the QQQ, we have a head and shoulders as well. If we're bullish, we want to break past 514.8, it's about 515. If you break that, we turn back up. If you remain more bearish, we're looking for a test of about 509. If that fails us, we're going to be coming back down to this imbalance at 507.5. I think there's a head and shoulders, and I think this imbalance could drag us lower, so we might be dipping back down to 509.5 or below. So watch and see how things end up going. I'll be very, very patient nonetheless. But I think the odds favor the downside. For Apple's not looking that great. Notice that we're making lower highs. So we had a high here, rejection, high rejection, high rejection. We're making lower highs. And if anything, that does favor downside a little bit more. We got to get back above 226.25 to turn back up. Otherwise, this might reject and start dipping back down for 222.67. That's the most likely case, in my opinion, for a little bit more downside. So just keep that in mind. Lo and behold, guys, look at NEO. I know you guys were like talking a lot about this. I was saying there's a head and shoulders. I've been calling this out for weeks. And look, it's playing out very nicely. We lost 4.9. It's actually dumping. So that was a good call out by us. We called out NEO's head and shoulders. It still looks bearish for the 4.5 target or below. Netflix looks more bullish, approaching the big event involving Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. This is more bullish. However, whether we get a bounce or not depends on some factors or a rejection. So we are going to be fighting some tough resistance here. If we get a hot CPI, we're looking for a move back down to 816 and eventually back down to 811. And if we're bullish, we want to break past 825 to start pushing even higher. My gut tells me that this is going to continue to try to push a little higher for 825. And we'll see if we get a rejection off that area or not. So give it some time to develop. But be very, very careful, though, because of the fact that this is at a tough resistance and also because of the fact that it's been pumping so hard with no pullback. For CELH or Celsius, this is going to try to rebound a little bit. I think there might be an attempt to get back up to 28, and we'll see if we get a rejection or not. But watch that very, very closely for a little bit of a push, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get from there. Besides that, we have Supermicro. Supermicro is looking a little bit more bearish right now. It's very sandwiched between 20, around 20, it likes to get bought back up. And then around the 28 area tends to reject. So I do see it kind of dipping to 20. And we'll see if we get a bounce back up to 24 or not. Otherwise, if we lose 20, we turn more bearish. This depends on different factors, so give this the time it needs. But that's what I'm seeing for Supermicro. There is some downside risk to this. For Palantir, this looks a little bit weaker right now. Now, here's the thing about Palantir. It's going to try to push a little bit higher, but watch to see if we break this high or not. I think that's going to be very important for how this ends up moving for those who are interested. The problem with Palantir is the fact that it has a tough resistance between 60 and 62. So we're going to be looking at these levels very, very closely. It might try to approach this key, the 0.382 fib area right over here. Might try to get back into this range right here before it starts to come back down. So I'll be watching that very, very carefully, at least as time goes on. So I presume what's going to happen is this. Tomorrow morning, this is going to most likely be pushing to the resistance right about here, very close to that 60 area to 60.5. And then we'll be watching after CPI comes out. Do we continue to push? If CPI launches this, we go back up to 62. If you get a rejection, this might be making a lower high. If the lower high comes, we could be revisiting the lows. So just watch that in mind. So the most likely move is we push higher. Look for a little bit of a push tomorrow morning and watch to see if we get that rejection off 60.5 or so. Look for a little bit more upside and see what CPI causes. That's going to cause us either dump back down towards below 58 or start pushing above 62. I think we push higher, then there might be rejection if we make a lower high. So we're looking for a big test, and then we'll see what happens. For Rivian, we look more bullish. I said if we break past 11.2, look for a bigger pump, and that's what happens so far. If we lose 11.2 tomorrow, we're looking for a dip back down towards 11. As long as we remain above that, we're looking for a push for 11.8 and eventually 12. I think the chart's favoring upside for almost 12, so give this the time it needs. We're going to be very patient nonetheless. For SoFi, we're making lower highs here. We have 14 as our resistance and our move back down towards 13.5 as our support. I'm favoring downside a little bit more for about the 13.5 area, followed by 13 flats. Look for a little bit more downside on SoFi and see if we get a bounce. But there might be a little bit of a dip coming. So just be very, very mindful of that. We might be dipping for about 13.5 or below because SoFi is kind of churning and losing some momentum. We need to get back above 14.5 to turn bullish. So it might be a small dip before it tries to bounce again later on. But for now, look for a little bit of a dip. Just as predicted, I said that on the IWM, if we end up losing 240, we're going back down to 238, and that's what happened so far. If we hold 236, so I think we dip a little bit lower for 236.3, so look for more downside on the IWM. If we hold this, we bounce back up for 240. If we lose this, we're going to be dumping back down for about 233. So it could go either way, but overall, it's just barely holding the support. And I think the odds do favor downside a little bit more. So look for a little bit more downside and see what kind of reaction we get after CPI. If we lose key support, we're going to dump even more. For AMD, there's a bit of a downtrend right over here. If we manage to break past essentially 144, we're looking for 146. If we end up rejecting, we're looking for a dip back down for 140. As of right now, it looks like it's going to attempt to rebound just a bit, but this could be making a lower high, so it might push closer to 145, then reject and start dipping lower as we are on a bit of a downtrend. Why do I say that? If you look at the trend, there's a head and shoulders, and the full measured move has not been made yet. So this might pop a little bit, then start dipping lower as the most likely case, so watch for that very carefully. ARM is very range bound. It likes to get bought back up, around 137. And we like to get rejected in the 140s. I think this is going to rebound just a little bit as well. Try to retest this imbalance. 142 could be coming before we get a rejection back down. So for a little bit more upside on ARM, then we'll see what kind of move we get. Also depends on CPI, so we'll see how it goes. Coin is looking a little bit more bearish. We pumped very, very nicely, but now we're starting to slow down. So we need to get back above 325 to turn back up. Otherwise, we could be dipping back down to about 306 to 307. So if we lose 307, we're going back down to 300. And if that fails us, we dip back down towards 290, then 282. I think the odds are favoring the coin is going to be turning like this and start dipping back down towards 300. I favor that a little bit more because of the fact that Bitcoin is slowing alongside this trend that's shifting. That depends on CPI, of course, but the chart does favor downside a bit more. It is due for that. It already pumped so much. This thing is up like, it's up dozens of percentage points. It's up like absolutely insane. It's more than double what it was worth just a couple of weeks ago. So it's pretty crazy. It doubled, and now it is due to pull back a bit. So I just want to call it out. It's completely normal, nothing abnormal whatsoever. Amazon is showing some life as buyers are stepping back in. They were trying to defend the 20 EMA right here. We were talking about this in my morning video. We're looking for an attempt to get back up towards 210. If it breaks 210, we turn more bullish, and if it rejects, it would come back down. I think we push for the 210s tomorrow morning, and then CPI is going to either launch this even higher or cause a rejection. So watch and see what the move happens to be, but look for a little bit more upside. Meta, if we end up losing 582, we're going to be dipping back down to 579. Might pop a little bit higher for about just under 588 before it comes back down. That's the most likely case in my personal opinion, so make sure you watch those levels very, very closely. For Microsoft, we could be making lower highs. So we had a high here, came down, made a lower high, came down, made a lower high. So we have 424 as resistance. If that breaks, we push higher. If not, we're going to be dipping back down to 421 to 420. I'm favoring a move back down, so I might try to push a little bit higher before it comes back down a bit. I think it dips back down to 421 to cool off before it tries to bounce again, but there is potential in this because of the fact that we are forming a nice accumulation. So this is looking more bullish, might dip and then bounce as the most likely case. Look for a test of the 421s before it tries to bounce, in my personal opinion. Google could be forming a cup and handle. If we lose 182, look for 180.07, followed by 178 as supports. If we break past 184, we're looking for 186. I think the cup and handle could lead to more upside, so watch to see if we get that break, and that's the most likely case that I'm looking out for. We'll see how things go depending on different factors, but give it some time. We had a high up here just under 29. We came down, made a lower high. This could be dipping back down to 25. We'll see if we get a bounce or not, but this might be dipping, so give it some more time as time goes on. So I think GameStop might dip a little bit more, but we'll have to see if we bounce off 25 or not, depending on CPI. AMC is just trading sideways around 4.5. It might dip back down to 4.4 and then consolidate. I'm not really seeing much for it. TJT might be dipping down to 28.98, might be coming back down to support before it tries to bounce, so give it more time to develop. The VIX is also stuck within this range. We'll have to see if the VIX gets a bounce depending on CPI. It's not really moving much. It's very flat. The 10-year is also trying to push. It could be pushing past 4.5 depending on CPI. If CPI is hot, this might go up. Same thing with the dollar. So we'll see. Will the dollar break past 106? It's at resistance right now. Ever since the election, it's been pumping like crazy. So we'll see if we get a bounce and if we break past this. The dollar is not affecting the market like usual, so I'm not as worried about this. So just know this, guys. Technically speaking, the market's a little bit more bearish looking. It does look like it might dip a little bit more. But then we'll see if we get a bounce or not depending on CPI data. So just keep that in mind. As I said before, I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know what's going to happen with CPI data, so we have to give it some time. So we'll see what happens tomorrow morning. I'll be back tomorrow before the market opens to give you guys another update on how CPI looks. Until then, guys, I hope you guys have an awesome day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world. I just wish the best for everyone out there who's watching these videos. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a great night. I'll be back tomorrow before market open to talk about CPI. And CPI is going to be pretty big for the Fed's policies, what happens with the market. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day and peace out.